Cops break into Black Man's home. He's a deadly Delta Force commander. You're about to hear a story so electrifying, it will leave you breathless. Imagine a decorated Delta Force commander, quiet, unassuming, returning to his peaceful home in a small suburban neighborhood. He's the kind of man who survived harrowing battles, led impossible missions, and walked away from near-death encounters. Now the unthinkable happens. Local cops, fueled by suspicion and prejudice, break down his front door. They have no clue of the warrior they're about to provoke or the dark secrets trailing in his past. This isn't just a conflict between a man and the police. This is a collision of two worlds. Get ready for a wild ride. Gregory Howard never thought his life would become a storm of controversy in the small town of Fairview Springs, North Carolina. It was one of those places where chain restaurants and strip malls dotted the main highway, and people usually knew their neighbors at least by face, if not by name. He had moved there after leaving Fort Bragg, where he had served over a decade in the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, commonly known as Delta Force people, on his block saw him as the man who walked his dog at 6 a.m., nodded politely in the mornings, and always kept his yard immaculate. He was quiet, didn't have many visitors, and had a routine that seemed unchanging. Little did they know about the accolades stuffed away in old footlockers in his attic, an Army Distinguished Service, Cross a Silver Star, and commendation letters signed by generals who called him one of the finest soldiers they'd ever led. Gregory, a tall, well-built black man in his early 40s, wore plain t-shirts and jeans most days. Since leaving active duty, he maintained his formidable physique through daily workouts in his garage. He rarely spoke about his military background, especially about the covert operations that had taken him into some of the most dangerous corners of the world. After all, Delta Force missions were often classified, and Gregory adhered rigidly to that code of silence. Despite Fairview Springs having a veneer of harmony, certain undercurrents were undeniable. A few officers in the local police department had reputations for overstepping boundaries, particularly with residents of color. It was whispered among locals that traffic stops sometimes escalated unnecessarily. Body cam footage mysteriously disappeared in a couple of high-profile incidents, and though many officers were professional, respectful, and committed, a small contingent fostered a culture that intimidated the minority communities. Lieutenant Chuck Morrison was one of those officers. Born and raised in Fairview Springs, Chuck believed himself tough and streetwise convinced that bigger forces threatened his hometown. Though he was no stranger to discipline and procedure, he had a deep-seated mistrust for anyone who didn't fit his idea of normal. Because Gregory mostly kept to himself, Chuck had his own biased theories. Maybe Gregory was running drugs out of his house. Maybe he was ex-military with PTSD, stockpiling illegal firearms. For months, these suspicions festered in Chuck's mind. Gregory's privacy and quiet nature were enough to ring Chuck's alarms. And though Gregory's record was spotless, no arrests, no complaints, not so much as a parking ticket, Chuck convinced some fellow officers that Gregory was concealing something sinister. They didn't realize they were stepping onto a path that could blow up into a major fiasco. One chilly evening, Chuck claimed to have intel from an unreliable confidential informant. The so-called tip alleged that Gregory Howard was involved in dealing high-grade narcotics and storing them in the basement. The source was a habitual liar who had once faced arrest himself for false statements. But Chuck saw it as the perfect chance. If there was even a remote possibility that Gregory was armed and dealing, Chuck wanted to pounce. Morrison persuaded a judge to grant a no-knock warrant. He painted Gregory as a dangerous suspect, capable of violence, possibly affiliated with armed groups. The judge, exhausted from a backlog of urgent cases, pressed by Chuck's urgent pleas, signed off without digging deeper. Gregory, meanwhile, was upstairs in his study, finishing a letter to an old army buddy stationed in Germany. He had no inkling that multiple squad cars were converging silently on his street. The night was calm, with a light drizzle pattering against the roof. The only thing on Gregory's mind was whether to watch an old war documentary or go straight to bed. At precisely 10:46 p.m., the police battering ram slammed into Gregory's front door. The neighbors jolted awake to the sound of splintering wood. Shouts erupted. Fairview Springs. Police department search warrant. Red and blue lights pulsed in the street. Gregory reacted with a flash of adrenaline that only a seasoned combat veteran could muster. He sprang from his chair, heart pounding, but mind razor-sharp, instinct kicked in. He knew that in his own home, in plain clothes, he was at a lethal disadvantage. If the intruders were armed, within seconds the front door gave way, and officers in tactical gear stormed inside. Guns raised. They expected chaos, shouts, screams, frantic suspects. Instead, Gregory took precisely 4 seconds to secure a side hallway. Without firing a single shot or grabbing a weapon, he dropped to his knees and placed his hands behind his head. He wanted to de-escalate. In the world of Delta Force, you learn discipline above all else. Yet the moment Chuck Morrison saw Gregory, something in him hardened. He ordered Gregory to the ground, pressed a knee into his back, and cuffed him so tightly the metal dug into his wrists. Gregory winced but said nothing. The entire commotion lit up the neighborhood. Several people peered out windows, some from behind partially closed blinds, others from their porches. The police fanned out, rummaging through Gregory's living room kitchen and even smashing open a locked closet in the basement. Chuck was determined to find something, anything that would justify this invasion. Shouts of clear echoed from each room, but they found no weapons stash, no drugs, nothing illegal. All they saw were pictures of Gregory's proud army service, old medals and neatly kept rooms that told the story of an orderly, law-abiding man. Lieutenant Morrison refused to give up. He insisted on checking the attic. He finally forced open a heavy trunk, anticipating a horde of contraband. Instead, he found camouflage uniforms, a battered set of jump wings, a black beret with a small crest, and a meticulously folded American flag. He pulled out the Army Distinguished Service Cross citation, and it told a story he wasn't prepared to read. One by one, the officers realized who they had pinned to the ground. Several younger cops recognized the Delta Force unit insignia. A wave of unease rippled through the group. Delta Force operators were the apex predators of the special operations world. They were trained in advanced counterterrorism, hostage rescue, reconnaissance, and direct action missions. If Gregory had chosen to fight back, he could have dismantled them with lethal efficiency. Morrison read the first paragraph of the Distinguished Service Cross citation. For extraordinary heroism, in action against an armed enemy. Howard's swift, selfless actions saved the lives of fellow soldiers. Another paper indicated Gregory had planned and led a rescue mission overseas, freeing 12 hostages from a heavily guarded insurgent compound. One of the younger officers, trembling slightly, looked at Chuck. "Sir, this man's a hero." Meanwhile, Gregory remained face down on the floor, wrists red and swollen from the cuffs. The entire search team had turned the house upside down, and there was still not a shred of criminal evidence. An awkward silence filled the home. Finally, one of the senior officers removed the cuffs from Gregory's wrists. The battered door lay off its hinges. The living room was in disarray. The shame among some of the officers was palpable, but Chuck Morrison's face remained stone cold. With forced composure, he spat out a terse explanation that they had received a tip. Gregory didn't lash out in the quiet, resonant voice of a man who had negotiated war zones. He asked, "May I see your warrant?" His calmness was more devastating than any raised voice could have been. A swirl of tension followed. Chuck Morrison attempted to read Gregory the no-knock warrant details, but Gregory instantly noted discrepancies, glaring mistakes, and the lack of substantial probable cause. Gregory's anger simmered beneath the surface, but he remained self-controlled. "I'm asking you to leave," he said, "now." Some officers hesitated. They glanced at each other, then at their lieutenant. Morrison's pride was wounded. He was in too deep. Exposing himself, he retorted, "We're not done here. We need to conduct a more thorough search." "That's enough." The voice came from Sergeant Andrea Willis, one of the ranking officers who'd grown increasingly uneasy during the entire raid. She looked from Chuck to Gregory, then back. "We found nothing. We have no reason to detain Mr. Howard further." Morrison stood rigid. His eyes flitted to the battered trunk and the scattered commendations. Each medal and letter hammered home a truth he refused to accept. They had barged into the house of a war hero under false pretenses. Outside, more neighbors gathered, capturing the chaotic scene on their phones. Tensions escalated. Chuck ignored the sergeant, scowling as he walked up to Gregory, face twisted in barely contained rage. "We have a right to be here. If you've got nothing to hide, you'll cooperate." Gregory quietly rose to his feet. He squared his broad shoulders, towering over Chuck by several inches, but in a gentle, authoritative tone, he said, "Sergeant Willis, please remove your men from my home." Immediately, Willis gave a final direct command. "Team, we're done out." Though Chuck Morrison's face was burning, he knew he'd lost the moment, one by one. The officers left, stepping over the destroyed front door. The red and blue lights began to fade from the windows. But as he left, Chuck muttered something at Gregory. "This isn't over." The next morning, Fairview Springs woke to the bombshell news. Across social media platforms, multiple smartphone videos showed the raid, the rummaging through Gregory's home, and how he was manhandled. Comments poured in, some outraged at the apparent misuse of police power, others calling for Gregory's immediate compensation, and still others applauding the police for doing their job. Local reporters arrived at Gregory's front door, seeking interviews. He declined politely, wanting only to restore peace. He called a contractor to repair his door, but the entire facade of his quiet life had been shattered. Gregory found himself reflecting on his service. He remembered the punishing training at Fort Bragg, the countless hours on firing ranges, practicing breach tactics, ironically, similar to how the police had just broken into his own home. He remembered nights in foreign deserts, hunting high-value targets, all under the black cloak of secrecy. And then the thought stung him. "I never expected to face that sort of hostility from the people I signed up to protect." However, the police intrusion started stirring memories of an older chapter in Gregory's life, a youth overshadowed by street violence and racial profiling. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood in Detroit, where police presence often meant anything but protection. It was the army that offered him a chance to harness his anger, refine his discipline, and find a noble path. Now, with a search warrant that was wholly unfounded, he had come full circle a man who had put his life on the line for his country, only to be treated like a criminal without cause. Within days, the Fairview Springs Police Department was under investigation. The county sheriff, who oversaw the broader region, ordered an internal inquiry into the events of that night. The mayor publicly expressed dismay over the hasty no-knock warrant. In response, Chuck Morrison doubled down, insisting that the tip had come from a reliable source, though the rest of the department was quickly distancing itself from the fiasco. Gregory received an outpouring of support from veteran communities. Old comrades from Delta Force reached out furious at what had transpired. Through an internal contact, Gregory learned that the Department of Justice was also taking interest. No-knock warrants had been a controversial topic, and this incident targeting a black veteran who was not just innocent, but highly decorated, set off alarm bells on the state and federal levels. Yet as the media storm intensified, Gregory stayed mostly silent. He told friends he had no desire to become the face of a national debate. He simply wanted accountability for the damage done to his home, his reputation, and his peace of mind. Behind closed doors, Gregory wrestled with how to respond. Suing the city would be straightforward. There was a civil rights case waiting to happen, but litigation was never his preferred path. He valued direct, honest conversation over drawn-out court battles. One afternoon, he contacted the local police chief, Roland Dempsey, requesting a private sit-down. Dempsey, a career law enforcement officer nearing retirement, agreed. They met in a small conference room at the police station, an awkward hush filling the space as Gregory sat across from the Chief Dempsey, rubbed his temples, visibly exhausted. "Mr. Howard, let me say, first, I'm truly sorry for what happened. This department prides itself on transparency and fairness, but that night was a disaster." Gregory nodded, expression serious. "It goes beyond that, sir," he replied. "This wasn't just an honest mistake. There was a deliberate attempt to paint me as a criminal with no evidence, no justification. That doesn't happen by accident," the chief sighed. He admitted some officers had grown used to questionable methods, especially Chuck Morrison, though the department had tried to rein him in. The wheels of disciplinary action moved slowly. "I'm not making excuses," Mr. Howard Dempsey said, "but I'm dealing with a cultural issue that's festered too long. My immediate concern is how we repair this damage." Gregory leaned forward, shoulders tense. "My parents taught me never to paint all law enforcement with a broad brush." "But what about accountability? Are you prepared to hold the people involved responsible?" Chief Dempsey nodded grimly. "We're opening a formal review. Morrison's job is on the line." Gregory studied the older man's face, sensing sincerity, but also the reluctance of a bureaucrat. He stood up. "Then I'll do my part to tell what happened, and remain cooperative on one condition. You make real changes, training oversight. Whatever it takes to ensure this can't happen again." Dempsey met his eyes. "I give you my word, but you need to prepare yourself for what's ahead. Morrison won't go down quietly." Morrison did, in fact, refuse to bow out without a fight. With a lawyer by his side, he argued that Gregory's military background had intimidated him. He claimed that Delta Force training made Gregory a high-risk suspect. He pointed to the no-knock warrant to justify his approach. The media, smelling blood in the water, latched onto the narrative. Was Gregory so lethal that the police were justified in barging in unannounced? Some pundits cynically asked if the community was safer or in danger. Meanwhile, local activists pointed out a blatant double standard. If a white war veteran had been living quietly, would Morrison have done the same? Then an unexpected development occurred. Gregory's army buddy, Master Sergeant Nicole Tate, stationed at Fort Bragg, decided to speak on Gregory's behalf at a public forum. Taking the podium in her crisp uniform, she recounted Gregory's heroism overseas, highlighting how he risked his life countless times for his fellow Americans. She emphasized his unwavering adherence to rules of engagement, even in life-or-death situations. Her voice carried outrage. He gave everything to serve this country, only to be treated like a suspect in his own home. This isn't just about Gregory, Howard. It's about every soldier, every veteran who expects fairness from the nation they protected. The room erupted in applause, and the press circulated her statements widely. Morrison, quietly watching from the back row, looked rattled. This was no longer just an internal dispute. It had become a moral reckoning for the entire town. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Chuck Morrison had a track record of using questionable informants. In at least 3 previous cases, his confidential source was found to have lied about drug stashes and weapons. One raid led to a lawsuit that the department had quietly settled. The local district attorney's office began preparing a potential criminal misconduct charge against Morrison. The DA believed he might have fabricated or deliberately skewed the intel to secure the no-knock warrant, especially given the humiliating lack of evidence found at Gregory's residence. Meanwhile, a local news station interviewed the informant. In a shocking confession, the man admitted that Morrison had pressured him to provide negative information about Gregory in exchange for leniency on unrelated charges. He told me to say, "I seen guns, drugs, whatever it took," the man stammered, voice trembling. I didn't want to lie, but I was scared. Everything was converging toward a major scandal. Gregory watched it unfold from the sidelines, refusing to gloat. He was still the calm, disciplined warrior, aware that he was the unwitting center of the Vortex 1. Evening after a particularly revealing news segment. Gregory walked his dog through the neighborhood, the cool air soothing his mind. As he rounded a corner, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Chuck Morrison, dressed in civilian clothes, eyes ablaze with anger. Gregory's dog growled. Picking up on the tension, Morrison moved closer. "You think you're a saint? Huh. Big war hero. All your medals. You've got this town turned against me." Gregory stood firm, leash tight in one hand. "It's not about me, Morrison. You crossed the line. People see that now." Morrison's face twisted. "You're the threat here. You soldiers, you come back. Messed up. Ticking time bombs." Gregory took a breath, recalling training that demanded calm in the face of provocation. "Listen carefully," he said, voice resonant. "I've seen men with your mindset, men who think force is the only answer. I prayed I'd never see that attitude on US soil. But here you are, harassing me on a dark street." Morrison stepped forward aggressively. "You watch your back," he warned, before spitting on the ground and stalking back to his SUV. Gregory exhaled, heart pounding. He felt that old fight-or-flight tension coil inside him, but he refused to let it rule him. Instead, he kept walking, dog at his side, eyes scanning the street as Morrison sped off into the night. The confrontation on the street filtered back into the rumor mill. A bystander had witnessed it from a nearby porch, as more details leaked calls for Morrison's suspension or dismissal amplified. The local department's internal review concluded that Morrison had indeed abused his authority. Under mounting public outrage, the police chief finally announced that Morrison was being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a criminal probe. This was a critical moment, a visible sign that the department was no longer shielding him. Gregory, meanwhile, had his own dilemma. Offers for televised interviews flooded in. National news outlets wanted his story. He had no personal appetite for the limelight, but he also felt a responsibility to speak out. He decided to give a single interview to the local news station that had fairly reported the facts from the start. Sitting across from the camera, wearing a simple button-down shirt, Gregory explained his background growing up in Detroit, joining the army, climbing the ranks into special operations, and returning home to find the country he served suspicious of him. "Not every cop is Chuck Morrison," he said, voice steady. "But it only takes one Chuck Morrison to destroy trust in an entire community. I appreciate the officers who do their job with integrity. What happened to me is a wake-up call. We have to demand accountability, or we risk tearing ourselves apart from within karma. They say eventually collects its debts. Chuck Morrison's spiral was swift. Allegations emerged from years prior. A young Latino man had been wrongfully targeted, leading to a similar raid. Documents showed Morrison's heavy hand in those actions, too. The man had died in a confrontation that many said was avoidable. With new revelations, Morrison's public image plummeted. Supporters who once lauded him as a tough cop backed away, realizing his pattern of reckless aggression. Internal memos surfaced, revealing that higher-ups had received complaints about Morrison, but had only slapped him on the wrist. In a last-ditch effort, Morrison tried to paint himself as a scapegoat, claiming the system was punishing him for doing his job. But evidence to the contrary was overwhelming. The district attorney charged him with filing false reports, misconduct, and civil rights violations. Gregory felt an odd mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because justice was finally being served. Sadness because it took a fiasco for the system to hold one man accountable. He knew there were countless more who never saw justice because they weren't high-profile Delta Force veterans with medals in their attic. Under pressure, the Fairview Springs mayor held a public press conference, flanked by Chief Dempsey. They delivered a formal apology to Gregory Howard. "We recognize Mr. Howard's extraordinary service to our nation and sincerely regret the unacceptable events that occurred," the mayor said. The cameras flashed, and the crowd was a mix of local residents, veterans, and activists. Chief Dempsey announced a series of reforms: improved training in de-escalation, stricter verification of informant credibility, and a commitment to revisit all no-knock warrants. The City Council promised to pass an ordinance, tightening the criteria for such warrants. Gregory was invited to speak. Approaching the microphone, he recalled the first day he'd been deployed overseas. "I prayed I'd return to a country that lives up to its ideals. What happened to me was a step backwards, but the community's response, your voices have been a leap forward. I accept this apology, but only if real changes follow." Thunderous applause filled the air. Camera crews beamed his words to households all over the county. A sense of possibility pulsed through the crowd. Maybe this incident would spark a shift in how policing was conducted in Fairview Springs. With official apologies and ongoing investigations, the immediate crisis tapered off. Gregory still needed to restore his door, repaint a battered wall, and replace broken furniture. The city allocated funds to cover his property damages. More importantly, Gregory was determined to help rebuild trust between law enforcement and residents of color. He joined a local advisory board aimed at bridging the gap between the police and the community. He brought a unique perspective, someone who had used force in the line of duty, but who also understood how badly it could be abused. Over weeks and months he attended panel discussions, listened to frustrated citizens, and advised the department on better training. Young cadets in the police academy were assigned to sit through seminars where Gregory described real-world scenarios from his time in Delta Force, highlighting the necessity of discipline, respect, and thorough intelligence gathering before taking action. Meanwhile, Chuck Morrison, awaiting trial, realized his allies were few. Even the local police union distanced itself, wanting no part in defending his brand of law enforcement. Word spread that the district attorney was preparing a strong case to ensure Morrison faced legal consequences. For Gregory, that was the karmic justice he had prayed for since the night they broke down his door. Some months later, on a calm spring afternoon, Gregory visited the local community center for a charity drive, collecting canned goods for homeless veterans. Dressed casually, he greeted volunteers, quietly sharing a kind word here and there. A teenage boy approached him, timid, hesitant, and told him he'd seen the news coverage of Gregory's ordeal. "I want to join the army one day. The kid said I was afraid of the cops around here, but after seeing you stand up, well, it made me feel better. Like maybe things can change." Gregory paused, eyes bright. He put a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Change comes when each of us stands up for what's right. If you do join, remember that your job is to protect people, everybody. Never lose that sense of duty, because that's how we rebuild trust." In that moment, Gregory felt a profound sense of closure. He'd fought wars in foreign lands, and now he'd fought a different kind of war at home this time, for dignity and justice. At Chuck Morrison's trial, new evidence painted a damning picture text messages in which Morrison bragged about being a kingmaker, able to shape any narrative he desired. His false reports about Gregory were laid bare. The defense tried to claim Morrison was overworked and undertrained, but the jury saw through it. It took them less than a day to return a guilty verdict for official misconduct and civil rights violations. Sentencing was scheduled for later, but the weight of the verdict was enough to confirm that justice prevailed. Many in Fairview Springs breathed a sigh of relief. For Gregory, it was a bittersweet moment. He attended the court session, offered no triumphalist smirk or vindictive glare. Instead, he bowed his head and prayed for the families that Morrison had harmed, including his own. He silently reflected on the extraordinary irony, a Delta Force commander being attacked in his own home by an officer who had no idea of the unstoppable warrior he was confronting. When the judge banged the gavel, finalizing the verdict, Gregory allowed himself a small, grateful smile. He knew the real victory was not just in punishing one bad cop, but in reminding a town and perhaps the country what accountability looks like months after the trial. Gregory's home was fully repaired, and the new door stood stronger than before. Neighbors greeted him warmly, some even offering home-cooked meals as tokens of gratitude for speaking out. The police department carried on, reshaped by new leadership and a renewed emphasis on training and community dialogue. Sergeant Andrea Willis was promoted to a higher rank, tasked with overseeing these reforms. She often consulted Gregory, acknowledging how crucial his input was in mending the department's battered reputation. Reflecting on the entire experience, Gregory found solace in something Master Sergeant Nicole Tate had once told him. Home is another battlefield, but it doesn't have to be a war zone if we all play our part. Indeed, Gregory believed the time for illusions was over. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible through cooperation, transparency and courage. Gregory also returned to an old hobby, writing. He penned op-eds for the local paper, using personal anecdotes to argue for balanced policing and improved community relations. Readers responded with gratitude, praising his emphasis on unity over division. With the nightmare behind him, Gregory's life reclaimed a steady rhythm. He still walked his dog at 6 a.m. He still maintained his garage workout routine. But there was a difference now. He had become a beacon of hope. Proof that sometimes the worst moments can spark the best kind of transformations. Thank you for sticking with this incredible story to the very end. We've witnessed the power of courage, the toll of injustice, and the triumph of accountability. Gregory's experience reminds us that one person armed with moral conviction truly can make a difference. By standing up to unfair practices, he not only cleared his own name, but also forced an entire community to confront its shortcomings, ultimately sparking meaningful change. If you found Gregory's story gripping, if it inspired you or moved you to think differently about heroes' justice and the complexities of law enforcement, please don't forget to show your support. Like this video, share it with friends who need a spark of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that tackle the heart of human resilience. Every click, every share, and every subscription helps us shine a light on the stories that matter most.